In the last lecture, you learned how to summarize data using aggregate functions. So here we have a simple query that calculates the total sales using the sum function. And here's the result. Our total sales is just over $2,500. But what if we want to see the total sales per client? That is when we need to group data by one or more columns. So here's how it works. Right after the from clause, we use the group by clause, and here we type out one or more columns for grouping data. For example, we can group data by client ID. And now when we execute this query, instead of one value, we see 4 values. These are the total sales for each client, but we don't see the client ID here. So let's add it to our select clause, client ID. And now next to each client, we can see the total sales value. Now here by default, data is sorted by the column specified in our group by clause, but we can change the sort order using an order by clause. So order by, let's say total sales in descending order. Now let's execute the query again. And here's the result. That is better. We can also apply a filter before grouping our data. Let's say we want to calculate the total sales for each client, but for the second half of the year. So here we use our where clause, where invoice date is greater than 2019 July 1st. Well, technically here we need greater than or equal to operator. So let's execute the query. Now we get a different result. So this is how we can group data using a single column. Now, before I show you how to group data by multiple columns, I want you to remember the order of these clauses. So just like always, first we have the select clause, followed by from. Now, optionally, we can have a where clause, followed by group by and order by. So the group by clause is always after the from and where clauses and before the order by clause. So if you put the order by first and execute the query, we're going to get a syntax error. Take a look. Because the group by clause is not valid at this position. So let's fix the issue. All right. Now let me show you how to group by multiple columns. So I'm going to join our invoices table with our clients table. Let's give it an alias, then join it with clients using what column? Client ID. Now let's have a quick look at our clients table. In this table, we have these columns like name, address, city, state, and phone. So let's say we want to group our data and see the total sales per state and city. So back to our query, we're going to change our group by clause and replace client ID with state and city. Now let's also change our select clause. So we're going to select the state and the city, and finally the sum of invoice total for each state and city combination. So to make things simple, I'm going to delete our where clause. That is better. Let's also remove the order by clause. We don't really need it at this point. Now look at what we get. Now that we're grouping by multiple columns, we see the total sales for each state and city combination. So when we use multiple columns in the group by clause, we get one record for each state and city combination. Now in this example, in our data set, we don't have multiple cities per state, but you're going to see an example of that as part of your exercise for this tutorial. All right, here's your second exercise for this section. It's a fantastic exercise. So we have a query that generates this report. We have 3 columns, date, payment method, and total payments. So we can see the total payments for each date and payment method combination. For example, on January 8th, we received a total amount of $32 using credit card and $10 using cash. So here we're grouping by multiple columns. Each group is a unique combination of these 2 values, date and payment method. Write this query against the payments table in this database. You will see my solution next. All right, here's the solution. Whenever I want to solve a complex problem, I start by dividing that problem into smaller and easier to solve problems. In this example, instead of grouping by multiple columns, let's start by grouping by date only. So we want to see the total payments for each date. That is easier. So let's select the date column as well as the sum of amount from the payments table. Now, let's give this an alias like total payments, and finally group our data by the date column. Let's execute the query. This is what we get. So we have solved almost half of the problem. Now, as you can see, our data is not sorted by the date column. So the next thing I want to do is to sort the data by the date column. So that is pretty easy. After our group by, we add order by date. Let's execute the query one more time. All right, here's the result. That is better. Now we're ready to add the second column, payment method. So if you look at the payments table, you can see that in this table, we only have payment method ID. So we need to join this table with the payment methods table to get the name for each payment method. That is pretty easy. We have done it before. So we're going to call our payments table P and then join it with the payment methods table. And we're going to call this PM. Now here we cannot use the using clause because our join columns are named differently. In the payments table, it's called payment method. In the payment methods table, it's called payment method ID. So here we'll have to use the on keyword on p dot payment method equals to pm dot payment method ID. Now that we have joined our tables, we go back to our select clause and pick pm dot name and rename it to payment method. And then we add payment method to our group by clause. So group by date and then payment method. Let's execute the query. All right. So here's the final result. For each date and payment method combination, we can see the total payments.